On this episode of A State of Control, we talk about the importance of source code, but not from the standpoint of ownership. We talk about how to develop good source code, the value of good source code, and how to make a profit still doing it. All that and more on A State of Control.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
A State of Control.
A State of Control, Episode 60, Technical Debt.
Support for AVNation is brought to you by
Extron, industry-leading technology backed by world-class support.
Welcome to A State of Control, an AVNation podcast that highlights the control programming and automation aspects of the audiovisual industry. My name is Steve Greenblatt. I'm your host. Thanks for joining us. So in the early days of A State of Control, and we're going back to episodes 16 and 17, to be exact, Rich, Tim Albright, and I spoke with David Barnett, and we talked about the importance of good source code. And it was an intriguing two-part conversation that had a lot of content, and it's about time that we revisit that topic again. So we'll be speaking about that today, and with me to discuss this and shed light on the topic, both from the AV programming perspective as well as a software development perspective, are a few guests and returning to us. And first, I'd like to introduce my partner at A State of Control. He is Uncle Richie, and he also goes by Rich Fergoza. How are you, Rich?
I'm doing good. Mellow West Coast greetings. I'm glad for us to have the two of the smartest guys in the room, and I know that it's not you or me. So,
oh no.
Yeah. No pressure. So let's introduce them. First, coming to us from Pantech Design, his name is Troy Morgan. How are you, Troy?
Doing great, guys. Happy to do this with you once again. Always enjoy being on the show.
Thanks for being here. And second, and last but not least, Oliver Hall from Ultimation. He comes to us from the UK. How are you, Oliver?
I'm brilliant, thank you. Very happy to be here.
Thanks. So the source code discussion has historically been about source code ownership, but that's not really what we're going to get into today. I think that that's a topic for another discussion, and I think that we've really explored that quite a bit. But what we're going to talk a little bit more about is the importance of best practices in source code development. So, Rich, let's set the scene for everybody. When you're talking about the design and formatting of source code, how important is that, and how relevant is it to AV control programming?
I think it's critical. I mean, again, it's the four of us here. We've got probably a good, I'm going to say somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 75 years of software development and programming experience, not only in control system programming, but software development in general. And one of the things that I've learned as I've gotten older is that my memory's gotten worse. And commenting is a matter of being able to your past self doing your future self a favor. But not only yourself, but as you grow and as you develop and as projects get handed over, it's the natural evolution of a project. I think, and we talked about this on one of our prior shows, one of the pitfalls of control system programming, and especially in the AV industry, is that you're always under the gun. There's always a deadline. The job's got to be going and the show must go on. And so there's always this mad dash at the finish line. And although we try as much as possible to avoid those instances, things happen. And when you get in a time crunch, your first reaction is to want to cut corners, just to, get it done, quote unquote. And the problem is that you don't do yourself any favors with that, because sooner or later, somewhere down the line, you are going to come back to the project, or you're going to hand over the project, or, you're going to upgrade the project. And all of the things that the person on site or who is deploying remotely has kept in their head, things pass, 4, 5, 10, 50 more projects pass between the time that you were there deploying that specific project and when you're coming back. And so It's really important. I mean, in the international flair, I must say it's the tea and crumpets of everything that we have to do. You've got to make sure that it's always there and it's always just right, because nobody likes bad tea and crumpets.
I think for in the AV world as well, systems change more frequently than perhaps they do in traditional programming. I guess live systems are constantly in development, but things tend to change a lot, don't they? So you do end up coming back to code that you wrote 6 months to 12 months ago. And like you say, Rich, when you come back and you sit there staring at code and you think, why the hell did I do it that way? If you don't use, structure and comments and things like that, then you can be in a right pickle. Yeah,
I feel like, being in business now for, I guess we're in our 15th year, you like Rich said, you forget sometimes that it's so important to be able to go back and know what the heck you were doing, or more importantly, in my opinion, that you're not the guy typically anymore. I mean, there's code that I wrote in 2006, 7, 8, 9 that my guys have to go back to. And it's rather embarrassing sometimes because they're better than I am, and they're looking at my stuff going, "What were you thinking?" And the point is, I guess it's not that I wasn't thinking. I was thinking about the now. I was thinking about what I have to do right now to pull this off and make it happen. And I think the biggest thing that we as an industry can do is recognize the importance of the future and the necessity of, like has been mentioned, commenting. That's huge. It's not about you. We have a little saying in our office, it hurts sometimes to say or feel, but it's the truth. And that is, your job is to replace yourself. I know that's probably tough for some people to hear, but that is absolutely the way we think, because we're going to grow, we're going to bring new people in, and those new people need to be able to read and do and update and whatever to the code. And when it comes to control system programming, like AV type programming, it's even worse, because you sort of take it for granted, and most of the people doing it are not software engineers. They're guys that have sort of figured out the AV side, and now they're getting into putting together simple Windows code. Commenting and even a structure of any kind or following a model that's out the window, man. They don't even know where to start. I think we could probably help a lot by creating some form of a structure for our industry, at least in the AV programming side.
I want to add something too that I just noticed right now, and this is kind of a rarity for State of Control. We've got 3 guys who are pretty much Resi centric. And so even more so, again, when we're dealing with commercial and we're dealing with education or industrial or government work, they're a bit more static. You've got a bit of a more fixed target to deal with, which is great because it does give you the ability to kind of parse off pieces and replicate a whole lot more. With Resi, I think we've all worked by the adage that your software is done for today. and homeowners and residential applications move at a much different pace than a boardroom or a huddle space. Those are pretty fixed and finite. I mean, you're not going to see constant 6-month to 12-month developments where you're changing out complete pieces of equipment or changing out an ecosystem or an add-on to a residence. And one of the things that, and early on when I would say with my guys, and the running joke is if I couldn't make the user manual out of your comments, they weren't going to be with us long. Because if that was not created in such a way for somebody to walk in and very plainly see where you're getting from point A to point B, you're costing yourself issues, you're costing us money, you're creating problems down the line, and it's tough. And we've all been guilty of it. And I think, one of the things to point out, and hopefully as, if some of the people watching are newer to the industry or they're business owners or they're going to be hiring newer people, is, we've made these mistakes. We're not infallible. I can guarantee, and I know, same thing as Troy. I look at stuff that I wrote in 1995, that I've opened and go, what happened? But the tools changed.
I think that was stuff I wrote last week.
Same, again, I'll admit it.
No, but like you say at the beginning, it's the time pressure can very much change the context of how you approach these things, can't it? Sort of, if you've got the luxury of time and nobody's breathing down your neck, you can go to all sorts of lengths. But if somebody wants you to get the job finished, then probably good structures and practices and things, they're the first thing to go out the window, aren't they?
So following up on that, and I think commenting is important, and we talked about going back to see your own code, and I think more often now we're working in teams, right? So that's another issue to take into consideration, and having some type of consistency and standardization, let's call it, maybe within your team. But how important is it, and Oliver, I'll send it over to you, is how important is it to also be able to hand off a project to somebody else that may step in, that may know nothing about your team, or and honestly, from a client's perspective, I can see that being important to them. However, they probably don't understand the value of it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you can come at that from all sorts of angles. I mean, for just briefly on the sort of documentation, or rather the code commenting and stuff. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but we look at the documentation or the commenting of a program as much more than just comments in the code as well. We have a bundle of documentation that goes along with the programming, which, data sheets of, and it's kind of, I guess some of the information is replicated, you can get it out of the program, but just to have a sheet of paper that talks about what IDs you're using and things like that, what room references you're using, all that kind of stuff. We try and keep that sort of stuff up to date as well. And that again is kind of supplementary information that really helps people get their head around the project. But specifically to what you're just saying there in terms of working in teams and taking over projects, that's where frameworks, I guess, that's the reason that they exist, or that's why, for things like, Pantech and Adapt and things like that, that little plug there, but that changes the game in terms, you instantly, you've got a common framework then that, there's good documentation for it. It's tried and tested code. People can pick it up, and people from different companies can pick it up as long as they've got the know-how. Then I think those kind of, the frameworks are that's the answer to a lot of the problems that we've got at the moment, I think. So the trouble is that a lot of programmers like to do it themselves, don't they? So it's sort of, they don't like relying on other people's code, especially if it's code that they can't kind of look under the hood and see how it ticks. That can be a bit of a problem. But I think that's a cultural thing rather than an actual technical problem. I mean, yeah.
Sure. So Troy, if you can, and I think Oliver set it up very well, is to give us a little bit of insight on how you establish a framework, and really what are the considerations that you put into to be able to provide something that many different people can get in and out of.
Yeah. So first, Oliver, thanks for the plug there. That was really sweet. The biggest thing that we were challenged with as we were growing as a team was this very thing: is how do you have multiple people be able to work together on things, especially in the residential, like Uncle Rich said, it's just kind of everything's a one-off, and you're updating these things on a sort of continual basis. It's not so much a get it done and you're finished. So how do we do that, right? So how we went about developing a framework was to first recognize we do have experience. We have done it wrong. We've done it different than anybody else and failed often, and all these things. So we took this approach to how do we solve the problem of working as a team, having a foundation and a framework, but not take away the power, right, of what the programmer really needs to have in his hands. We didn't want to create a sandbox, because that's relatively simple to cut the lines like this and say this is all you can do and put the blinders on and go, and but to have a framework that is sort of infinitely scalable and flexible and all that, it's sort of a catch-22, right? Because like Oliver pointed out, it's great to have a framework, but if you can't open the hood and look inside and see what's going on and all that, sometimes that sort of puts people off, and they don't necessarily like the fact that they can't dig in. But when you look at the pros and cons and you weigh that, you're going to come out on the positive end, having a framework as a team and being able to sort of jump in and handle whatever gets thrown at you. And it's really, again, back to what Oliver was saying about the way they do things in terms of documentation. It's the documentation of the framework that really sort of spawns more opportunity and growth and momentum. Because having that foundation, not only do you have the code, but you also have the documentation. I mean, I think our ADAPT manual for simple Windows is probably about an 85-page document. And that right there is invaluable, because anybody can now have a reference and sort of make it happen. So how we did it was sort of back to the direct answer, Steve, is it was a learning process. It was iterative. It took years to do, but it was all out of experience in what we had sort of failed at.
But Troy, the thing that you've managed to do as well, I think was an important point, is that you've got a framework, but it's extensible. You can build anything with that. You know, yes, you've kind of packaged up concepts like rooms and sources and things like that so that they work in a particular way. But like you say, that's your learning and your best practice kind of being sort of productized. But the great thing about it is that you can then build on top of that. So all of the custom stuff that clients often ask for, that you're not closed off from doing that kind of stuff. And I think, like you say, that's where some of the sandbox solutions, that's where they kind of are proper, you know. Fine, they may work in 90% of the cases, but there's always those other ones where you need to do more.
Yeah, there's one fundamental piece that I think we can all, the Resi guys, can agree with. There's a good thing that comes with a floor plan and being able to visualize and see on a large touch screen, you know, what the room's got turned on and lights and, you know, all these. That's a great thing. Fat chance pulling that off in a framework in a repeatable manner. You're not doing it with anything. There's nothing out there that can do this. There is always a degree of customization required. And so when you look at just that one aspect of it, you can layer that in beautifully on top of our stuff, and away you go, or whatever you want. So anyway, sort of back to, you know, what Steve's saying, I think the hardest part of figuring these things out is having the awareness and the expertise and the experience to remember what it was like, where you broke things, what worked and what didn't work, and being able to expand upon that is key to, you know, sort of creating this foundation that I believe our industry really needs, with flexibility too.
So, Rich, I'll bring you in on this. You know, I think in the past, you know, speaking to what Troy said, we would see a lot of programs, or we'd see a lot of applications out there that were intended to be that, you know, drag and drop solution, and they created a lot of uneditable code, right? And a lot of extra overhead. And how do programmers go about, like, how important is optimization, you know, in source code versus readability versus, as you said before, just, you know, getting the job done? Because in the end, we're all probably producing the same product.
Yeah, I mean, you know, step one, and again, I'll kind of hammer this over and over, is that, you know, the all four of us sitting here are business owners, and so step one is, you know, what's going to make money. And then you work backwards from there. I mean, I did not start this company in the hopes of filing for not-for-profit status. So, so you know, you have to kind of take a look at that first step, which is you are a business, you are a company, you are in business to make money, and the way to make money is to be efficient. And like Troy was saying earlier, which is you got to be willing to take a look at where you're weak and hammer on the areas that you're weak and accept it. And know that, you know, it hopefully it's temporary, but it is that awareness first. So, you know, where does that come from back into dealing with this, which is, you know, there's nothing wrong with efficiency. There's nothing wrong with replicatable tasks. There's nothing wrong with configurable tasks. It's, you know, and for most of the dealers out there, you know, I mean, this is a unique situation. All of us have made our careers in bespoke situations and in massive projects, and those are great, And I mean, it's always the brass ring, I think, that any integrator wants to go after, but they're monsters in and of themselves. And some of them are company killers. And so, the company killer is something that you can go after, but at the same time, you got to find the ones that pay the light bills. And so my feeling has always been first, if you can find something that's profitable, that you can replicate over and over with a minimum of modification, frameworks work. Customization works, drag and drop works, all of those things work, but understand what you're using them for. And that's where a lot of dealers I see get in trouble, is that they unfortunately listen to the marketing people from the control system manufacturers. And, we've heard it years and years and years, no programming required. It's just not, it's
Don't start.
But you still got to deploy it. You still have to make it work. You have to deal with things there's just the oddest things that happen in the real world. And a lot of these no programming required iterations of these frameworks are being built in an office, on a campus, not necessarily being tested under live fire. And then what happens is the integrators wind up being the beta sites and then reporting back. That's a very draining and expensive proposition. So, the step one is always, what can you repeat and what can you work with? And, is that your secret sauce? In some cases it is, but it's deployment. But, more importantly, for programmers, it's realizing, embracing you're part of a team. We're possibly the last push. We're the things that the client touches. This is the thing that's seen out there, but you are still part of a team. You are responsible of working with an integrator, or you're working with a consultant, you're working with, a facility manager, an owner's representative, and finding all of those tools to be able to get to deliver that product. And my feeling has always been, if there's a product that fits it and it meets those solutions 90% of the way, and then we throw in that other 10%, well, that's the difference between midline companies and top-end developers. That last 10%, not everybody needs that last 10%. And there is a whole lot of work and development and sweat and tears and failure that go to that point. And it's okay to stay right in that middle. Like I said, it's, it goes back to the stick with your tea and crumpets the code and you're going to be happy. You're going to make money on it. And continue to build your business from here on out. And that's kind of the subject of a whole other show entirely. If we're talking about plugs, I'll say one thing that works out great, and I'm a fan of it. Oliver came out with a diagnostic tool he calls Simplified, right? Which it's an editor. It's basically, like having an editor for your code that looks over your shoulder and says, you screwed that up. You screwed that up. That's not going there. This is an issue over here. And it's literally the little thing that's barking in your ear saying, you should fix that. You should fix that. You should fix that. Use the tools. And probably the biggest thing that I would say in the source code conversation is we're not encouraging the use of tools. And that's been in the tech industry for years. Just software that doesn't do anything other than keep an eye on you to make sure that you make less mistakes. And that's probably the biggest advancement I've seen in really in only the last 5-6 years, where we're seeing it now in the AV programming industry, that there are lots of tools out there. I know Control Concepts came out with some tools several years ago that we're doing this process as you're growing, as you're building a team, as other people are going to be getting to the project. Are we ever going to have standards that we're all going to follow? No, because it's still a bit of the Wild West in terms of the individuals. But if we can collaborate more and build those tools more, better code, more money. So that's the way I look at it.
And some of those tools are kind of bleeding over from traditional programming as well, aren't they, into AV kind of, as, I suppose I'm going to talk about Crestron naturally, because that's kind of where we're focused. But with the adoption of C# and stuff like that, there's tools now, things like StyleCop and CodeMade and things like that, which, like you're saying, Rich, they help you as a programmer, that you can think about your design and your, you're doing the hard part, the writing the code, and leave the kind of stylistic stuff to something else. These tools can help you tidy up your code as you go along, and I love it when you compile and you don't get any warnings and things like that. That's kind of where we were aiming for with Simplified, to try and help people sort of keep their code nice and neat and tidy as they go along, so that they don't press compile and get 15,000 errors or something, or warnings and all that kind of carry on.
So Oliver, if you wouldn't mind, take that a little further. One of the things that comes to mind for me is versioning control and archiving, and but also we're looking at a lot more about security concerns, and now we're dealing with a lot of things that aren't isolated to our own little home that nobody else can get into. How has source code evolved to modern day, and what are some of the considerations that have to be taken into account now?
Are you talking specifically about security stuff and things like that, or just?
I guess what are security is one of them, but what are some of these best practices to help others out there?
I think that's it. There's tons of tools now, I mean, so my pet favorite is sort of test-driven development. That's one of the ethos of programming that I'm particularly keen on. And it's difficult with things like Crestron and simple Windows programming and stuff like that, because they don't really lend themselves to testing frameworks. But in terms of more traditional programming, C# and stuff like that, then it takes a lot of discipline, because, to be able to write tests before you write your code, which is the right way to do it. I mean, a lot of the time I'll write a bit of code and then I'll write a test and then I'll write a bit more code, and, you sort of flip-flop between the two. But being able to run a set of tests once you've finished a module or a chunk of code, and have it, pop through the tests and give you the green flag on all of them, it's actually very motivating, because all of a sudden that you've got a piece of code that, obviously, as long as you've written your tests properly, because you have to be testing for the right things, but as long as you've done that, you can actually walk away from that code and say, I know that works. And when somebody then comes back and says, oh, your programming's not working, you can actually say, well, actually, I know it is, and it must be something else, or look somewhere else, or it's a test that we can cover, or something like that. And that's great. And then, we can take that the next step on. There's a thing called continuous integration in more traditional programming, where, every time you check in your code into a version control system, something like that. So, everyone loves GitHub and things like that, but we use SVN in the office because we're not really running a sort of distributed model. But every time we check some code into SVN, we have a continuous integration machine, which there's a tool called Jenkins, which is freeware, that pulls the code out. It runs your unit tests and it emails you if you failed anything. So every time you commit something, you're getting a tap on the shoulder, like Rich was saying before. Something's just going, actually, you've just broken the build, and then then you can walk across the office and tap someone on the shoulder and say you just committed something that broke it. And I think this is the thing. You can automate an awful lot of stuff. It doesn't have to be a burden. It does take some discipline, but there's definitely things that you can do to make sure that the quality of your code, we're talking about lots of different angles here, aren't we?
Yeah, but I think these are all very valid, and some of these are, I think, are going to be very new to some people, because we don't always think about different ways to go to the extent, and I think that the return can be very measurable.
Yeah, and like you say, I think Rich mentioned before that a lot of AV programmers kind of come into this world from, they're not necessarily coming down the traditional programming sort of track. And to be honest, we don't really look at ourselves as an AV company. We're more of an, we don't, obviously we're involved in things that have audio and video, but we're much more of a control integration company. So I look at it much more as a sort of programming exercise. But guys that have come from an installation background aren't going to know what things like mocking are and stuff like that, other than, having a laugh at somebody. But, you can create classes, and you can do this with Crestron ones, where you kind of pretend to be, the device you're talking to, or something like that. And you can build these testing frameworks that test all of your code to quite a large extent, so that when it actually does go into a live project, that 75, 85% of it is okay.
Trey, can you add to that at all from the software development side of things? And is there enough of a crossover that AV programmers can learn from, and where, I guess what advice would you give somebody that was looking to step up their game when it comes to source code?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, tools are very, very important. I have not found that there is any one tool that's perfect, that does everything, that fixes all the problems, that solves everything. I think the most important thing is recognizing that that tools for all kinds of different pieces of writing code are important. You've got, you've got to sort of build your tool set. It's no different than any other trade in any other industry, that if you are using the wrong tool for the job, you're going to have a negative result or a result that's not as good as it could have been, right? So tools are very, very important. Stepping through that, though, to understand the right tools. Well, you've got tools that help you sort of design, simple Visio org chart or something. Start with the end in mind a little bit, and begin building a framework on paper. Oliver said something that's sort of near and dear to my heart, because it's what I do too. You write code, and then you go, okay, let me write a little test thing, and then you go back and you kind of update the code you wrote. Reality is we should probably be doing it a little different, and we should probably focus on a few tests, get some results, be able to take those metrics and then use those to decide on maybe what the next steps are. So in the very beginning, that's just some sound advice. Another piece that I think is really, really sound advice is every, in my opinion at least, every piece of code to some degree has a foundation. You have to have a solid foundation. This is that repeatable sort of you can rely on it. Like Oliver was talking about, this works. As long as you've written your code in such a way that that piece is an untouched piece, that it's something that you can rely on because it foundationally does what its IO needs to do and presents you with what you need to then take the next step with whatever it is, that's extremely important. So a foundation that you can trust and rely on. And also, to add to that, unintended consequences are like the craziest thing to me, because you might think it's a great idea to add in this thing or do this other thing, and you have forgotten how intertwined the other things in your code really are. And all of a sudden, you are in a position now where you feel like you shouldn't have to go test your code because it works, but you've done this thing, and now you have unintended consequences that you didn't even expect. And so a lot of times just testing, adding things, trying things, throwing things at your code to see, what happens is also a really good idea. And then lastly, I want to touch on the versioning aspects of things. I think that anybody writing any kind of code, whether it's AV or other, has to have some understanding of how versioning needs to work for them. What is a large change versus a small change? How do you document that? How do you sort of model it in such a way that version 2.1.7.9 means something, right? What is that? And something that is written, documented, and everybody follows it's extremely important. I think it's crucial, especially to that foundational piece, whatever that is. I think you get that right, and you get that foundation right, you sort of put yourself in a position where you can guarantee some things. And then back to Uncle Rich's point, that's where the money is. That's where we are a business. It's step one. We're a business. We got to make money. That's where the money really, really is. Once you can sort of trust yourself, trust your team trust a process, a versioning scheme, and a foundation, you've now got something that you can build on.
Now, Steve, if there's something else I could mention there in terms of, sort of, if you're trying to keep yourself profitable and make the most money you can, there's a concept called technical debt, which I think, a lot of people don't really know what it means, but it's basically, the idea is that every time you're making changes to your code, you're potentially building up a thing called technical debt, which is kind of issues that remain in the code, and you paper over them by working around it, or you say, I'll just make this little change. The trouble is that those things grow and grow and grow, and eventually they consume your code, and then even small changes that clients ask for will then become enormously kind of convoluted or large tasks to do, and it makes you unprofitable basically, because something that is you might be changing the text on a button or something, or we've got a thing where we have a project that we took over, and in different rooms the client wants different sources, and the project was built in such a way that it was very static. So now we have a situation where certain rooms have to show different subpages for the touch panels to show the different sources and things like that. That's a problem brewing for us now. So that's where sometimes it is actually worth just to go back over these things and try and, it's ideas like refactoring and things like that for source code. You can go, these are sort of tools that they don't really necessarily make your code do anything extra, but they reduce that technical debt. And if you can keep the technical debt low, then you can keep working on software. If you let it build up, eventually it'll wipe you off. It'll kill you.
That's sound advice. We use a software product called EaseViewScaler. And EaseViewScaler is a refactoring tool that's it's fantastic. Now, obviously, you're not going to throw simple windows into EaseViewScaler and get anything out of that. But from the simple Sharp side of things, the C# side, it's been great. So those tools are important. Yeah.
Well, thank you guys. I think that was a great way to end this, and I think a lot of good content to share with the audience and the listeners, and hopefully this will spur on future conversations. And I know that I took away a few interesting tidbits, so thank you. Unfortunately, we are running low on time, so I'm going to need to wrap some things up, but it sounds like this can be a conversation that can certainly be continued. So I'd like to thank the guests today. And first, I'll start off with Troy Morgan from Pantech Designs. How can people get in touch with you, learn about Pantech, or learn about Adapt?
So yeah, obviously you can always find us on our website at www.pantechdesign.com, or feel free to reach out to me at any time. It's tmorgan@pantechdesign.com. And of course, Facebook and LinkedIn and these things, you can easily find us there as well. Adapt also has its own university, a YouTube university, which if you're interested in Adapt, it's a great place to start to give you a sort of an understanding of what Adapt is and how it can help you in your business.
Thank you. Oliver Hall from Automation. How can people get in touch with you, learn about Automation, and also your products?
Okay, so same as Troy, we've got a couple. There's two websites. One is the sort of the businessy facing client sort of website. That's www.ultimation, which is ULTAMT, Ultimation with an A, .com. And then we've also got a shop site where we sell a few modules and things like that. But that's where you'll find Simplified. So that's shop.ultimation.com. So if you go to that one, there's basically the baseline Simplified. There's a free version which it doesn't do a great deal, but it does do what Simple Windows does for you in real time. So every time you save your Simple Windows program, it'll give you a list of the disconnected signals that you might have. So you don't have to go through the painful, compile step and wait 2 minutes to find out what you haven't finished. So that can make you a bit more productive for not very much. And then if you want to, you can invest in the refactoring or the debugging entitlements as well, which will give you a lot more analysis across the program. And then the other thing, so it's oliver.hall@ultimation.com if you want to email me. I'm not great on Facebook, but my wife is on there, so you'll find her lurking around on the Crestron Programmers group and things like that. And then Twitter is probably the thing that we do most of our kind of announcements on. So there's there's @Ultimation and @Ultimation Tech, which is where we kind of tend to announce more sort of module updates and things like Simplified and stuff like that.
Great. Rich, I think you and I are going to have to step up our game here. How can people get in touch with you, learn more about what you're up to?
Well, unfortunately, I don't have 7 different websites to be able to connect to.
What more?
The best place, obviously, one of the best places, you can find me on Twitter @rfragosa. You can go to the website, fragosadesign.com, but first and foremost, best place to find us is on the AVNation.tv. The complete bullpen of shows that we have. Obviously, follow us here on State of Control, and we have all our other shows catering to the AV industry.
Very good. And to just follow up on that, Rich and I were just on a recent AVNation webinar, and we had some other past guests from a State of Control, and we were talking about this basically control and automation topics that span the gamut from voice control to programming versus configuration and so forth. I'm sure you can find that at avnation.tv. Check out the weeklies and the monthly shows, as well as the supporters that help to make this show and the others possible. I can be reached at controlconcepts.net, my company website, as well as on social media at Steve Greenblatt. But we would like to also hear from you, so please reach out. Let us know what you think of the show. Let us know what topics to be doing in the future. We're very interested in making sure that this show continues to serve the audience, and we're touching on the things that are most important. With that said, that'll be it for today for State of Control.